Welcome to the Assembly Transportation Committee's first informational hearing for 2016. I appreciate all of you being here today. Before we go too much further, I'd like to make a few introductions. First, I'd like to welcome members of the committee, which is any members of the dais that aren't on our committee yet? Not yet. So we'll wait until others show up to introduce them. But thank you, Assemblymember Campos and Assemblymember O'Donnell, for being here in a timely manner. I'd also like to introduce our newest committee consultant, Melissa White. Comes to us from CalCog, and before that she was with the High Speed Rail Authority. Also, I'm not sure I properly introduced our second newest consultant, Justin Behrens. I think I called him Josh when I first introduced him the first time, and so we're going to do it properly this time. Welcome, Justin, and we've renamed you Josh. So please join me in welcoming Melissa and Justin to our committee. So that brings us to the topic at hand. We've got a very full agenda today. I'd like to thank all of our presenters for being here. Some of you have traveled a good distance to be with us, and I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to hearing your testimony today. As you know, we're here today to get an update from the administration on the progress that is being made on the Freight Action Plan. As many of you recall, this effort was kicked off by the governor's executive order last July, and it calls for creating an integrated freight plan, combining existing plans developed by various state departments into a single plan. This is a big effort on a short timeline, so it's critical that the committee gets an update. And not only do we want to know how it's going, we want to make sure that stakeholders get a chance to weigh in, to inform the process so that we get a product that works for everyone. Because, as I've mentioned many times, one size does not fit all. So let me give a little bit of background just to get us started. It is no secret that freight is at the forefront of discussions these days. Back when MAP 21 was signed in 2012, there was a call for states to complete their freight plans. So California did just that. As the legislature's request, Caltrans worked with stakeholders to produce a state freight plan. This plan was a compilation of projects that had come up through the regional planning process. So in essence, it represented the universe of important freight projects around the state. But more importantly, they were compiled from projects in the region's sustainable community strategies, so that they represent projects that reduce emissions. At the same time as the state freight plan was being developed, ARB was working on a sustainable freight strategy, a plan to reduce emissions in California's freight sector. The Sustainable Freight Strategy, sometimes called the Freight Pathways document, came out April of last year. Then in July of last year, the governor called upon folks in his administration to develop an integrated freight action plan. He called for this plan to establish clear targets to improve freight efficiency, transition to zero-emission technologies, and increase freight system competitiveness. A pretty tall order, I'd say. And I have to be honest, some folks are nervous. We all want clean air, but not at the expense of transportation's needs entirely. To be perfectly frank, there are concerns that this plan could end up prioritizing zero and near zero emission technologies over much needed infrastructure improvements. The ones that the regions have told us are needed to reduce congestion and grow their economy, and the ones that were developed to meet SB 375 and AB 32 goals. Further, there are fears this plan could lead to the requirement that businesses re-up their investments in clean air technology, even before they've had a chance to recoup their investments they've already made. And you'll remember that we went through a recession and productivity was down. Questions are swirling. Will this plan really improve economic competitiveness? Or will it set us back, making California a less attractive place to do business, and all within the context of wanting clean air and reduced emissions? That's why we're here today. We want to hear from you, the administration, about what direction the plan is taking. We want to talk turkey. What's going to be in the plan, and more importantly, What's going to be prioritized for funding? After we hear from agencies and departments, we're going to move to our second two panels and hear from key stakeholders to learn what they would like to see in the integrated plan. What should we focus on? What should be the priorities? Should we even strive for one integrated plan, or would separate plans, one to address transportation needs and one to address air quality needs, be better? I want to point out here that while we don't have Bay Area folks on our panel today, other than Ms. Campos, they are very involved in our freight issues, and she's very knowledgeable in that area. I think she just stepped out. In fact, I attended the Bay Area's Freight Roundtable last week, and there is a lot going in the Bay Area when it comes to freight. I also want to encourage committee members to ask lots of questions, please. This is our chance to dig in here and get engaged in this very important topic. One of the things that is very important that I've gained knowledge in my travels throughout the state is that we will be receiving up to 3 times the amount of freight in the next 5 years, and don't want to lose our competitive edge where other shippers and freight people will want to go elsewhere to get their product into the United States. So goods movement affects everyone in all of our districts. So let's get to it, and I'm looking forward to a very productive session coming through this. And with that, Mr. Asajian, would you like to add anything to that?
Thank you, Mr.
Going forward?
Looking forward to the hearing.
Thank you very much, sir. Good answer. So what we'll do is we'll go through the agenda, and for an update on the Sustainable Freight Action Plan efforts, we're going to ask Secretary Brian Kelly, Richard Oglesby, Richard Corey, Kome Asije, and Penora I'm going to butcher that, I'm sorry, Avidis, to come forward and glean us with your knowledge. Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, good afternoon. As stated, my name is Brian Kelly. I'm the Secretary of the California State Transportation Agency. I'm very pleased to be here today to provide information to the committee on the development of the Sustainable Freight Action Plan, a document that, when completed, will reflect a collaborative effort from 3 state agencies and several departments to express a vision for the state's trade system that is both in the state's economic interest and in the state's environmental interest. As noted, the directive to complete the Sustainable Freight Action Plan comes from Executive Order B 3215, signed by the Governor on July 16, 2015. The order directs me and my agency to work with the Secretaries of EPA and the State Natural Resources Agency, Secretaries Rodriguez and Laird, and relevant departments to develop an integrated freight action plan by July of this year. That's July 2016. The executive order requires the plan to establish clear targets to improve freight efficiency, to begin to transition to zero-emission technologies, and to increase the competitiveness of the state's freight system. The order further requires the agencies to initiate work on corridor-level pilot projects that integrate clean technologies, alternative fuel, freight infrastructure, and local economic development opportunities to improve trade corridors. My colleagues on this panel will provide more information about these components of the plan as we go forward. As noted, the final plan is due in July of this year. The intention is for the plan to align multiple agency efforts to express a singular vision for freight policy in California that, as noted, is in the state's environmental and economic interests. The timing, in my view, could not be better, as federal and state funding becomes available to invest in our trade corridors and in clean technologies, and the California Air Resources Board works with local partners on the adoption of the State Implementation Plan, a plan required by federal law under the United States Clean Air Act. As you will recall, Mr. Chairman, probably more than others on this committee, this approach of addressing trade through the lens of economic and environmental policy is similar to that approach taken in 2006 when the legislature put on the ballot Proposition 1B, a transportation bond measure that included the state's first comprehensive investment in public dollars in our trade corridors. Proposition 1B included a $2 billion trade corridor improvement fund to invest in trade-related infrastructure, and the $1 billion goods movement emission reduction program to invest in programs and projects that reduce harmful emissions from trade-related activities. Proposition 1B combined TCIF funds with SHOP dollars to invest $2.4 billion to complete some 90 infrastructure projects throughout California, valued at nearly $7 billion, a 2-to-1 leveraging of state funds. Proposition 1B itself required the TCIF and TCIF funds be allocated to, quote, and I'm quoting the law here, emphasize projects that increase mobility while reducing emissions. Some of the most notable infrastructure improvements that came out of the TCIF program include the ongoing work to replace the Gerald Desmond Bridge in Long Beach, the Cargo Transportation Improvement Emission Reduction Program at the Port of Los Angeles, the construction of the Colton Crossing grade separation in San Bernardino County, 32 additional highway rail grade separations in the Southern California region that reduced localized emissions, improved the flow of goods, and increased the safety of rail and vehicle traffic. It also funded 18 miles of track improvements benefiting freight and passenger rail operations in San Diego County. And, of course, one I know you're familiar with, Mr. Chairman, based on your weekly commute, the relocation and expansion of the truck scales in Cordelia along the eastbound I-80. I should also note that that program is also funding the interchange improvement at the 12, I-80, and 680 corridor, another one I know many of you are familiar with in your weekly commute. Similarly, funds from the Goods Movement Emission Reduction Program in Proposition 1B were to be used to, and again under the law, finance strategies and projects that reduce emissions and improve air quality in trade corridors. Under this program, 13,000 older trucks have either been replaced or retrofitted with equipment to reduce emissions and operate more cleanly in the state's trade corridors. Grid-based power has been installed at 11 berths in Oakland and 25 berths in Long Beach, Los Angeles, and Wainimi, so ships can, quote, plug in rather than emit diesel to be powered while in port. 25 locomotives operating in the Central Valley and Los Angeles Inland Empire corridors were upgraded to reduce emissions. 5.2 million pounds of particulate matter and 200 million pounds of nitrogen oxides, or NOx, were reduced throughout the state's trade corridors due to the activities in this program. And I should note that coupled with other programs run by CARB and local partners, diesel PM emissions at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach have been reduced by over 80% in the course of the last decade, a time concurrent with the passage of Proposition 1B. By any measure, the approach to trade that carefully considered both the economic and environmental impact of the investment of public funds in trade corridors has served the state well. These reductions in harmful emissions are particularly meaningful to the communities located near the centers of trade activity. Further progress in this area, of course, must be achieved. As CARB moves forward on regulatory programs for California to meet its air quality objectives, and as the state considers new investment of public funds in trade-related infrastructure and clean vehicle technologies, the Governor's call for an integrated freight action plan is as timely as it is important for the future of our state. The plan is sure to inform, improve, and prioritize the freight mobility plan released by Caltrans last year, a plan required to be updated at least every 5 years. We look forward to further engagement with policymakers and stakeholders as this plan is developed. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to open to questions or to presentations from my colleagues.
You know, in the essence of such a large panel, I'd like to do questions after
Sure.
Of the panel when they've made all their presentations, if that's okay with the committee.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Oglesby, thank you for coming here today.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me, Chair Frazier and committee members. I'm Rob Oglesby. I'm the Executive Director of the California Energy Commission. And we're an agency that doesn't appear very often in front of this committee, so I'm particularly honored to be here today and happy to join my colleagues to talk about the Sustainable Freight Plan. The Energy Commission, you think of most often as dealing with probably the electrical grid, generation, renewable resources, natural gas. And in fact, we administer a broad range of energy programs, including setting energy efficiency standards for buildings and appliances, permitting large thermal power plants, We do energy planning and analysis and energy research, but we also have duties to support alternative fuels and vehicles. We're best known for administering the Alternative Renewable Fuels and Vehicle Technology Program, which most members of this House remember as AB 118 or AB 8 program. And what that program does is calls for the Energy Commission to administer a program that invests about $100 million a year in advanced vehicle technology and fuels and charging infrastructure. We also have done some work specifically related to the ports. We've, within the last year, joined a collaborative with 5 ports to work on alternative and renewable fuel vehicles and equipment and program planning. The ports increasingly rely on electricity to support their activities as many aspects of the ports become electrified. They are also interested in increasing resiliency, microgrids, those sorts of things, and, of course, in saving energy, because a greater proportion of their budgets go to support energy now not derived from diesel but from electric resources. So we're working collaboratively with 5 ports. The ARF VTP program that I mentioned, the AB 18, AB 8 program, also recently released a $17.8 million solicitation targeting California's ports that will fund advanced vehicle demonstration, natural gas vehicle deployment, and intelligent transportation system projects. This is an open solicitation, but I wanted to draw it out as something that is focusing on the freight system. Now, going back to the governor's executive order on sustainable freight, that order called for clear targets to improve freight efficiency, transition to zero-emission technologies, and improve the economic strength of the freight sector. So the draft action plan addresses this challenge by suggesting draft targets. Now, keeping in mind that this is a process that is encouraging stakeholder involvement and input, these are draft targets that are being put out there for discussion. And they begin with improving the freight system efficiency by 25% by 2030, deploying over 100,000 zero-emission freight vehicles and equipment by 2030, and fostering future economic growth within the freight and goods movement industry by promoting flexibility, efficiency, investment, and best business practices through state policies and programs that create a positive environment for growing freight volumes while working with industry to lessen immediate potential negative economic impacts. This effort involves the collaborative work of many state agencies as well as others to create a collaborative policy framework and strategy for charting a new path towards sustainable freight transportation in the state. The Freight Efficiency Strategies Development Group has been established to look at opportunities to implement advanced technologies and planning that will reduce congestion, idling, and a more smoothly flowing goods movement system. To look at competitiveness, the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development has convened meetings with industry groups focused on the economic competitiveness of our freight sector and identifying measures that can be taken to maintain and improve our standing in the face of international competition. This working group will be assessing the impacts of potential actions in the plan on their own operations. Additionally, the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development will be working with the Peter F. Drucker Graduate School of Management at Claremont University to further assess potential actions impacts on the freight industry and businesses. Supporting the transition to zero-emission technologies, existing work groups established for the Air Resources Board's technology and fuels assessments, as well as the Energy Commission's technology merit reviews, have identified opportunities for demonstrating and deploying zero-emission vehicle and equipment technologies where possible and promoting near-zero emission technology options elsewhere. The effort has been structured to be an iterative process. The group sought broad stakeholder input to refine the concepts through events such as the California Freight Advisory Committee and past and upcoming outreach meeting series. A draft plan is under construction that will define the vision for sustainable freight, present refined targets and metrics, detail actions that the state will take to support these efforts, and identify pilot projects that represent concepts in line with the mission. This draft plan will be presented through public workshops to receive additional feedback from stakeholders. As you can tell from this process, a strong emphasis has been placed on engaging stakeholders throughout the process from the beginning. Through the work group and outreach activities, great ideas have been fostered that serve as the groundwork for action items that each agency will undertake to move California towards its sustainable freight goals. Richard Corey, on my right, will speak about these actions items in detail next. Thank you for your attention.